For more, let's cross to Boston. Claire Boine is researcher at Boston University, specialist in public health. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
You heard when we were talking with the correspondent there, the sort of the gap between how people outside of the United States view the problem and how those inside the United States view the problem. And what we're sensing is that it's becoming, with every shooting and every year, more and more polarized. Why?
Yeah, I would even say that there is a gap inside of the US actually. And I think that the weapon industry is given a lot of credit for polarizing the issue, but really what they're doing is creating this misperception, this prejudice that most people in the US would be against gun violence prevention policies, which is not the case. We, in our research, have shown, and many other researchers have shown, that laws like universal background checks are very effective at preventing homicides. In fact, if there was such a law at the national level, around 6,978 people would have been saved in 2020. However, the NRA has created this idea that most gun owners in the US are against such laws, which is not true. More than 90% of people in the US and more than 90% of gun owners support these laws. And so really, I think that the gap that you're mentioning, between the rest of the world and the US is also present in the US. There is a gap between the reality of things, what people actually want, and what the NRA is pretending.
Yeah, the NRA, which, again, is hosting its annual meeting in Texas, coincidence to the calendar. It begins on Friday. They didn't used to have this absolutist stance. What happened?
That's right. There was a coup inside of the NRA a few decades ago, and it was basically the leadership was overturned. In fact, the NRA was pro-gun violence prevention policies initially because it's a marksmanship organization concerned with people being able to shoot well and target shooting. And I actually have friends who are NRA members because they're target shooters. And in most US states, if you want to participate in the best target shooting competitions, you do have to be an NRA member. However, it's become politicized in the past few years. And there's also been this kind of union between the gun issue and other issues that have nothing to do with it, like diversity and inclusion and other conservative issues that should be left out of this debate because they have nothing to do with gun violence.
Is it about making money, that you can sell a lot of assault rifles? The gun industry now in the United States, it keeps growing every year. There's 375,000 people in the U.S. employed in the firearms industry. It's huge.
Yeah, you're right. There is definitely some financial interest at stake, and that's the whole point of lobbying. And then if you talk about the NRA specifically, now it's a whole organization that is also based on grassroots people who may not at all align with the leadership. So it makes it seem that the NRA is very powerful and they have more than 5 million members, but really most people inside of the organization support universal background check, are not extreme gun rights advocates like the ones that are usually portrayed in the media, because they're those spokespeople that are sent by the NRA, but they're not representative.
Is it a marriage of ideology and financial interest? Or when the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, starts pondering, and Senator Ted Cruz, they start pondering the militarization of classrooms instead of gun control, is it purely this sort of us versus them ideology?
It's a complex question. There are many factors at stake. So there's obviously the financial interest, and there is some level of ideology. There is a social identity of gun owners in the US. People identify as gun owners, which also creates this perception that they are gun owners and non-gun owners, and that they're very different people and they can't talk to one another. There's also the fact that again, the NRA is supporting other issues as well, not just advocating against the gun violence prevention policies. And I think something that is notable on this issue of us versus them and how people think is that you have this widespread idea in the US that if you do any kind of work toward gun violence prevention, you're involved in some sort of conspiracy theory for the federal government to take away all the guns in order to become some sort of dictatorship. And I've even seen it myself. I've seen like on Twitter and things like that when I was doing research that it must have been funded by Joe Biden. And it's really funny when it's you because you know that it's not true, obviously. But it's also really sad because you see that people on both sides, gun owners and non-gun owners, are not very different. And they should talk, and if they do, they realize that they can agree on many things. They can agree on universal background check, they can agree on other policies. And on this question of arming classrooms, it's really interesting because there's one thing that the gun lobby gets right. They always say it's not the guns that kill, it's the people. That is right, it's the people, and that's exactly why we should pass comprehensive universal background checks to make sure that criminals and violent people can't get their hands on guns.
And having a gun, especially you were mentioning a minute ago, how this sort of outrage and fear over they're going to take your guns away, it festers over social media. Having a gun, is it part of creating your persona in this digital age?
This is a great question, which should be investigated much more. My guess would be probably yes. And there's definitely some also kind of peer pressure or impression that the world is in a worse state than it is. And, obviously social media have polarized the debate in the past few years. Where we live in a world where it's difficult for people to agree on basic truths or facts. And so that is definitely part of the issue. And I think that investigating how the social identity of gun owners changed in the digital age would be really interesting.
Of course, all these people buying guns, and the U.S. is the country where you own the most guns per person in the population by far. That's not happening in the virtual world. It's happening in the real world. Claire Boine, where's this all going?
You mean what is going to happen to the world?
No, what's going to happen in the U.S. with everybody overarmed, this militarization of the United States?
I'm hoping, I don't have a crystal ball, sadly, but I am hoping that people can start having a more constructive debate. I think if we just if we stop assuming intention, if we meet people halfway and we say, okay, those gun owners have good intention, they don't want children to die. The gun violence prevention people, they don't want children to die. If everybody talks and stop assuming intention on the other side's parts, I think it will be major. And also, I think the first step would be for this gap between actual public opinion and perceived public opinion on these policies to be reduced, and for policymakers to say, okay, we don't care about what the NRA is saying. Our population is backing us. This is a democracy. Let's act now.
Claire Boine, looking for the middle ground. Many thanks for joining us from Boston.
Thank you.